sort of expert. As you probably know, Cerebra fund, I think, 6 centres, of which Pencrew is one, and Leeds, where I am, is another one. I was at Cardiff, so there's Cardiff logos all over this, which is irritating Leeds terribly. But most of the work was done at Cardiff. And one of the ideas is that these centres would link up more and more. So some of the expertise that you are developing here would be shared. But it was one of the nicest things I did last year was the family research work with Lisa and her colleagues. I'm not sure it was for them, but it was, and everything, you know, their thumbprint and their views and everything is sort of on every page, every line of this toolkit, and that's why it's got, I think, good feedback, because it's had that input from people that know about it at the sharp end. It's only the first edition, and we're wanting to sort of add to it significantly. And so Lisa and her colleagues are going to be doing outreach sessions very much like this. So this is a trial session with nice, friendly, kind people who are going to sort of critically analyse it, and also the day in a way, because Beverly here structured the day. So you play a game to start with. Just sort of critical analysis of how this will work if we try and roll it out. The idea is that we will have another set of family ambassadors doing much as Lisa and her colleagues did, perhaps in Leeds, perhaps in Mexico, perhaps in London, perhaps in Scotland, and then we will gradually roll out these ideas. But increasingly, we will feed into these ideas about problem solving, expert sort of ideas that have come from Pencrew, and also particularly I think Warwick, where they're doing some fantastic stuff too. Warwick and Exeter doing this amazing stuff on resilience and well-being. So this is just sort of talking it through, and this is stuff you will know. So in a way, I want sort of critical feedback. I can take it. So I'm just going to quickly sort of run through this idea. Just before let's see what I can't remember what I said on this. The strapline to this almost is, what do you do if you've got a problem, a disabled child, and you don't have a system who's a barrister? If you don't have that network, as probably most of you will know, is if you've got a good lawyer, if you've got a good bank balance, if you put your head down and you go, you tend to get a good outcome. But if you're unsupported, and if you don't have those networks, and you don't have that confidence, you don't feel empowered or resilient, then you can be easily crushed, as many people are, because they don't make contact with those networks. So that this was about trying to empower the people that don't have those networks. I seem to have destroyed this already. Someone got the glasses on. That's good. This is a mouse, isn't it? It doesn't seem to work. There we go. Let's try. So we've got one of the things in the guide is sort of Mythbuster, which is all. For those of you who don't know, I've been a solicitor for 35 years now, and a lot of my time is spent. So half of my life I'm still a solicitor. A lot of the time is spent challenging local authorities. I write books on carers and disabled children and things like this. And the problems just do reoccur, and they're the same problems over and over again. They're the same myths that occur over and over again. So we've, in a way, gathered some of the myths together on page 6 of the book. But largely these are things that I haven't thought up, but the family research ambassadors have said. You know, these are myths about, well, you could read those there. And these are myths that a lot of people working for social services or education believe. They're not being deceitful, they just have never been told that these are actually legally untrue. So we've got some really nice posters. Beverly's had some lovely posters made about these. And then the other thing I should say is at the bottom of page 6, we've got this new idea, is that once you've got this, if you get the conceit, the idea that there are some categories similarly occurring problems, you often do need to sort of, I think you have to, if you've got a difficulty, if you've got a disabled child, you can get support. I think it's the biggest issue, getting support from support groups, social media, from any organisation that will help you. Being supported is probably the most important thing. Using some tricks is quite useful, but also you will need some knowledge. You'll need to project manage this. Hardly any of you are going to have the luxury of having a virus solicitor who will just do it all, and they won't anyway. If you did that, they'd do it badly. So you have to effectively project manage all of the problems that you have. And you'll need to dive down sometimes and dip down to get a bit of the detail law. I don't know that you need it to go, to how much law you do need. You need a little bit. And on page 6, you'll see at the bottom, we've got this website called difficultbox.com. Too difficult to think about box, basically. So we're developing a website called Difficult Box, which will be, some of you will use IPSI. They've got a very good website that we all like. You just go there and it's got 20 boxes and you click on. And we're plagiarising that. So we're going to have it for social care, for education, for health. And that's being developed at the moment. What we're trying to do, of course, is to not just do this for England, but also Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. I'm rather hoping we'll do Spain. So we're going to produce a new resource which is just about to come online, but we'll need you to help us with, this is the expert. It's going to be a bit like TripAdvisor. We're not going to write new guides. We're going to say, well, if you've got a problem with transition, then there are actually 27 guides on this, but these are the 3 most current best. If you've got a problem on charging, well, there's 6 guides on this, but this is probably the most useful and accessible. So we're just going to have all of that detailed information, so you don't have to spend on Google and then not know if it's the good guide or not. The conceits then are that there are various types of disputes, and different types of problem require different types of response. So we have interagency disputes, people saying we can't get that, to people telling you, well, I'm sorry, there's no money, people saying, well, there's a panel, presumably you have panels around here, panel says no, or panel says not this week. Really complicated problems that you want something that doesn't really exist, everybody agrees you need it, but it doesn't really exist. Delay is a crazy difficult issue. You've got a situation where nobody seems to be able to make the decision. You've got personality clashes. And you've got what we call highly contested fact disputes, which are the worst. So we run this, well, Beverly and her colleagues at Cerebra have a legal advisory line, and we tend to deal with all of those except number 9. They're the ones that can be very, very difficult to help. So I was going to quickly go through this. There's precedent letters at the end of the toolkit for dealing, often it's just a fairly simple letter, simple paragraph saying, well, you can't do this, a magic paragraph that conveys the force of that argument to the public body. On the Too Difficult Box side, we're going to have a whole suite of precedent letters and precedent paragraphs to help you, and hopefully they'll be well indexed. So interagency disputes, which is really very common, Tweedledum, Tweedledee bit. So the conceit with these diagrams, with these pictures, is that it's Alice in Wonderland. We did ask Lisa and her colleagues if they had heard of Alice in Wonderland, because I'm very old and I grew up with it, but apparently a film has been made about it, so young people like you know all about this. But this is so often the case. They're saying, well, we can't do anything because it's health. They're dragging their heels, or it's not you, it's Tool Bay because it's the different authority. And you're just piggy in the middle. Now that's simple because the way you deal with that is you don't try and work it out. You just shoot them both, effectively. You just say, look, my brain hurts, I can't be bothered to think about this. One of you should grasp the nettle. And there's a lovely little paragraph you can use in the precedent letter, because the Ombudsman said this, the family doesn't have to, they've got some dispute. One of you grasp the letter, fund the damn thing, and then have a fight behind the bicycle sheds. But don't get in the way of the family. So don't even try and think about those sort of issues. You then get this idea that we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't do the other. Now, that in legal terms is very unusual. I mean, there are some things that local authorities can't do. So, social services can't provide open heart surgery. That's a health thing. There are some areas, but most of the issues where you're doing, they are shared responsibilities, or it's very unusual. There's no such word as can't, basically. Even if a local authority doesn't have to do something, it has a power to do something, it can say, well, we don't have to do it. And the answer is no, you don't have to do it. You have discretion. But you can't say, therefore we won't do it. With a discretion, you have to always think about whether you'll do it or not. There's a phrase called, so if they say we won't do this or we can't do that, the answer to that is to get that in writing. And there's a lovely letter that we have in the precedents, because often people say this in conversation. They say, "Oh, we can't do that," or "We don't do that in Devon." And the precedent letter goes something like, and it's in the pack. At 3:25 on Friday, Mrs. Smith from your department said to me, "We don't do housework, or we don't do babysitting." I may have misheard what Mrs. Smith said, but if you don't tell me that I had misheard what she said within 3 days, I take it that it is your policy that you won't provide a sitting service to enable me to stay at work or whatever, because I believe that is an unlawful fettering of discretion. And there's these magic phrases, and fettering discretion is one, and I've been told another I've got to add to it, which is the word proportionate. I love that, or reasonable, or maladministration. There are magic words that you can just put into it, because you can't say, we won't do this, we won't do that. You can say, well, in general we don't like doing that, but you can't have these we don't do stuff. And you hear it all the time. It's not common for it to be put in writing, so you have to capture that in an email or a letter.
Can I ask actually what that means?
Oh, what? Well, I've got a discretion to provide. You don't qualify for the school transport arrangements because I don't know why. My duty says I've got to do this, and you're just slightly outside that. It's a hard case, but I don't have the duty to, but I could. I have the power to do that. Because the Acts say even where there's not a duty, there's a power. And then I say, well, I'm never going to do that. I had a case with a carer, they were saying, well, we've got, under the old law, you didn't have a duty, there's a duty now to need carer services. But the old law was a power, and what we needed was some transport help for the parent to go and visit an adult in a care home. And the local authority said, well, we're never going to, we've decided we'll never provide a carer service in the form of transport support. You can't do that. You've got a power to do all of this. Parliament's given you this power. It's a big deal. And you just say, no, we're never going to do that. Well, if Parliament didn't want you to do that, it would have said you can never use, a care service could never be transported. But it didn't give you, it didn't do that. So you are saying, even though Parliament's given us this wide power, we're going to fetter it. We're going to fetter, lock up, bondage, all that jazz. So fetter is sort of padlocking it. Is that the problem? Yeah. Yeah. You've got to be sort of into that sort of.
I know you are,
yeah. You're pretending, I can see. So yeah, it's fettering means locking up. Doesn't it? I mean, bolting English degree people help me. Yeah. So we're just saying we'll never do it, and you can't do that. You've got to take it. The thing about the discretion is that you've got a duty to consider using it. So when I ask you to exercise discretion, you've got to take it out and say, well, I want to. You can't just say, I'll never do it. And then the local authorities say, well, yeah, we would do it in exceptional circumstances. And then we say, what do you mean by exceptional? And so you can have quite a lot of, when there's a power, they just can't say what's power we're going to do. The budget is spent. The thing about most social care duties is that once an authority has decided something's needed, it's got to provide it. So if it decides that you need a sitting service of 5 nights a week or 10 hours a week, if it's decided you need that, it's got to do it. It's simply got to do it. Now, if there's 2 ways of doing it, it can choose the cheaper way. But it doesn't, so it can't use its money as to say, well, we haven't got any money, we won't do it. It's just like a statement of special education need. What's on that statement's got to be provided. It's a non-resource duty. There are some duties, but not many, that they can use their money. But so normally that's really not your problem. How they meet your need is a budgetary question, but whether they meet it is not. They must meet it. And so again, it's worth saying, look, can I have this in writing? I was told you can't do this because you don't have any money. I understand that that's what we would call a non-resource dependent duty. It's a sort of buzz phrase, but those little phrases sometimes count.
Can I just say that I've been in contact with Newcastle Social Services on a piece of paperwork that Devon started using. I spoke to someone quite senior in Newcastle who was a little bit miffed that the paperwork was only a pilot document and is 18 months out of date, and the new one had been issued in July 2015. But they had still got the logos from Newcastle, which if Devon had taken ownership of it, then they should put their own logo on the bottom. And that's one of the people who developed this piece of work with Newcastle. This is a resource allocation system paperwork. Actually is in Devon, and he emailed him to look into it. So I'm at the beginning of this process of trying to understand how it was looked into.
Yeah, I mean, in the back of the guide here, we have a sort of glossary which we'll have to sort of expand. And what we're trying to do is to get a bit of humour into it as well, as you'll have seen. In the glossary we have the answer, but we also have a bit of humour with it. So at the back of it we have a thing called personal budget, I think. So page 26. Yeah, personal budget is a sort of lump of money. And sometimes these personal budgets are produced by a thing called a RAS, or Resource Allocation System, which is a sort of computer system that feeds in some very basic generic data about your child, and then it comes up with a figure like £283. And they say, well, the Resource Allocation System says your personal budget is £283. So, but at the moment we're spending £500 on Fred, so That's not on. We've had to slaughter 3 children this week just to cover our budget because he's getting too much. So cut your... And of course that's just nonsense. They've got to meet need. And they can produce these indicative figures from a resource allocation system, but they're irrelevant. They just go in the bin. What you say to them is, I'm not interested in the personal budget, I'm not interested in the RAS, meet need. And then tell them how much it costs. That would be the personal budget. So there's quite a lot about that.
I've done that, but I'm still getting no response. I'm at the stage now where I've actually financially got the figures and set them in, and I'm still not getting the response.
Right. Well, then you're going to have to accelerate the complaint and write. One of the magic things here is to write to the monitoring officer to say, look, you've got to give me an explanation how this sum you're talking about is sufficient to meet the need, because it must. You've identified the need, that's on the left-hand side of the equation. The right-hand side of the equation is how much it costs, and the right hand must meet the left hand. So that you can't trim the package to meet the budget. The budget's got to be increased to meet the need. If you don't get a sensible response, then you have to make a formal complaint. We've got one there. And it's good to copy it to the monitoring officer, because the monitoring officer is the senior solicitor in the local authority. And many of these disputes with social services never get to a lawyer. Social services are unkeen to ask the legal department because they often have to pay for it. They've got internal auditing. So when you write to the monitoring officer, so you write to the monitoring officer, senior solicitor, and you copy it to the local to the social worker, saying, look, I'm being told this. I understand actually that. And we've got some precedent cases on that. There's a case against Kensington and Chelsea called SAVA, S-A-V-A, where the court said, you can have personal budgets, but it's got to be what the cost is of the package. And RAS is just one way of developing this. So the panel is really the same issue, that the social worker spent the time, the social services assistant, they worked out what you need, and then some completely arbitrary panel that's never seen you says, cut it or go back. Well, again, on what basis are they saying that? Because the person that spent time with you and assessed your need has made these decisions. She or he has the discretion. You can't, once you've identified need, you've got to meet it. You can't then arbitrarily cut it. So what was it that the panel, what was the information the panel had that gave them that right? And of course the answer is panels are largely unlawful. They're devices designed to ration, which they're not allowed to have. And so if you just challenge panel decisions, they eventually give in because they're very suspect creatures. The too difficult to think about point is often, you need a package and it doesn't exist in Devon. And it's quite complicated and require this, 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 and this. And the social worker's got, a caseload of 40 files, and they just don't have the space to think about things. This is the email that's at the end of my email inbox, which has been there for a year and a half, and I've always got 2 or 3 of those. And we've all, well, you probably are perfect, but I mean, there are all, we call it the file at the end of the desk. In solicitors' terms, there are files you should sort out, but you do the easier ones, and that's the one you have to open a bottle of wine before you eat. And this is a common problem. Now, the answer with that is to acknowledge that it's a problem, and we deal with that, and to say, look, this is a problem, and we can see that there is no clear solution. So what you've got to do is to say, what would a reasonable public body do? A reasonable public body, a reasonable solicitor, in my case, would develop a strategy. So this week I'm going to do this assessment, that week I'm going to spend phoning up all these providers. When I've realised there's not one provider, I'm going to have to get 3 or 4. So I'm going to have a strategy that with milestones, that I'm going to do this week, the next week I'm going to do that, so that after, say, 4 weeks, I will have a plan explaining how this service will be put together within 3 months. I liken lots of these things to sort of doing adaptations to houses. Sometimes it's really complicated to take a wall out and put a window in and things like that. But you know, you break it down. You get an architect, you get a builder, you get some things, you do this, you make phone calls, you get these providers. And that's how you do it. And then after a month, you do come up with a plan, you do come up with an idea, and then you follow it through. So what you're saying to authorities in these cases is that this is a difficult problem. So I expect within 24, 28 days that you will provide me with a plan explaining how within 3 months you will deliver this service. And if they don't provide you with that plan within 28 days, you can make a formal complaint, because that's a reasonable body. We're not expecting you to magic this. And one of the answers also is to realise that it's not just their problem is your problem. So often a good technique is to come up, if you can, with a solution. To say, well look, I know this is a problem, but there's this, and this. I found these people, I found that supported living, I found this home, and they fit the bill. So there's a huge amount to be said on that we could amplify, but it is, and we deal with that. Delay is very difficult, and the thing about delay is to complain early, because things just drift. And if you read lots of these ombudsman reports, as I do, you know, years go by, because everybody always thinks things are going to resolve. You get a promise, and the issue is to actually put in a complaint. It's not necessarily a sort of blood-curdling complaint, but just a formal complaint. So I don't want to upset my relationship, but I'm going to have to put this in because I'm concerned it's going to drift, and these are what needs to be done. So it's about complaining early, and also complaining to the right person, which may be quite a senior person. So we've got quite a lot about that. I don't have authority to do something is again very similar, where you've got, you know, quite often you get a situation where you've got somebody, a child with high functioning autism, and the disabled children team saying we don't deal with that person because we only deal with you know, they've got an IQ over 70, and then you find that actually there's nobody in the local authority that deals with that child who's got impairments. And of course then you have to write to somebody in the senior authority saying, look, you've got to effectively write to the monitoring officer again and to the director and say, look, I don't care who deals with this, but you know, the law says you've got to deal with this. So somebody, again, grasps the law and deal with that action. So it's a question of pitching your complaint at the right level. And personalities. I really want to do some research on this. This is what we're calling the warrior mothers. When we talk about the family research ambassadors, family research ambassadors is a very long, complicated word, so we just say, well, no, they're just the warrior mothers, which is, I mean, what I find it fascinating that, and I'm sure many of you have heard me say this before, but you're some of the most difficult people in the world to deal with as a solicitor. You come to me and say, look, I've got this problem, and I say, right, I write a letter. And then tomorrow you turn me and say, did you write that letter? And I say, no, I haven't done it. Right, I'm going to complain. I'm going to go to the Law Society. I'm going to you know, the Citizens Regulation Authority. I'm off to that. And of course, you are very combative. And of course, you are very combative because that's what you've got to be. You have to be, because that's the only way you get response for those that you care. And I liken that to sort of post-traumatic stress injury that you have been experienced. That the system, you know, you would say, well, I wasn't born like this. You know, I don't really like what I've become, but the system has forced you to, in a way, change your personality to be somebody that you don't necessarily. You might be like that, but most of us, so you've created, what we're quite interested in doing is suing local authorities for that sort of injury, effectively, that's happened to us.
I was given a really good piece of advice by a friend of mine
Yeah.
who's a barrister, and I've been on holiday with her over the last 3 years. And apparently I'm a calming influence on her, and I deal with all her problems, which is very nice. We have this reciprocal arrangement. But before I went to the tribunal, the first KSN tribunal, which I mentioned earlier, the best bit of advice she gave me was don't whinge, don't moan, don't complain. Judges really hate people with that attitude, and so I went in with very much a modified view of it, and tried to, and also understanding court behaviours as well, that you have to behave like the people you're dealing with almost, to gain respect. So
treat them like they've got some sort of quite advanced autism is the best way because they have. It's like eye contact, doing up shoelaces they can't do. So they're different. But I mean, it's horses for courses. I think. I think the thing is that you don't have really many. I don't think that people that are fighting for somebody. And this isn't have any choice about the way they develop, and I think you can't turn that off actually. To be honest, that's why I think support is so important. But I think it's also important to realise that working for a local authority at the moment is pretty hellish, and you have to develop a pretty thick skin, a coping mechanism too. So it's not an ideal environment, and it would be, it is quite important to see both sides of that, and that's why often it's quite good to have somebody with you like your friends sort of thing, to say, well, yeah, this is not going to work. Busting in tears sometimes works, brilliantly touches, but whinging probably doesn't.
Well, that's interesting, the adverse effects on parents' personalities, I find. You're also intimating that actually there's adverse effects on the employees.
Yeah, I think they develop very thick skins. And if you don't develop thick skin, you leave. And they're the good ones. You know, they're the ones people, of course, they're nice, they're sensitive, but they can't cope. They can't cope with it. So I think it, and that's where it would tie very much with sort of the work you and Richard are doing. I think, and there is increasing stuff being written about warrior mothers, actually, and grandfathers, warrior grandfather. I'm quite interested to see if we could sue on that, because then it gets real. If we can take litigation for damages done to carers by unresponsive authorities. So at the moment we're looking at delayed diagnosis for autism, and that's
How many is a case? I'll be on the case. 10 years it took to get a diagnosis.
Yes, exactly. Well, that's what we're looking at, because in those situations it's well known. That's a bit of research we're trying to do. So, when you can get these Rottweiler personal injury lawyers involved, then that makes a big difference. Actually, that changes things.
I think one of the reasons as well why we go into battles so heavily, and it's probably not recognised, there's so much that we let go of because we haven't got the time or the energy to fight these ones. And then when one comes up and we think we really can't let this one go, all of the baggage from everything that's happened all comes out into that one. So we do.
I think it's, I'm not criticising it, if you see what I mean, because I think it's actually the only way you can cope. I did research on neuroconsultants that operate on people who have terrible brain injuries, and they don't really listen to anybody, they just operate. And people criticise them, and you say, no, if you're in that situation, you just make decisions. You're hardwired to go in, make decisions, and do these things. And there's no point in criticising them, because if you're in that situation and you're in a car and somebody phones you up and somebody does, blah blah, and you can't criticise parents who have really vulnerable children who are just being treated terribly. All of us would fight like that. but it's almost in a way realising that. People are combative because it works. It's the only way. And if you don't do it, you're not going to do it. But it's being aware of that, really, and also saying, well, you know, we really like not to go through those things.
I quite like the term warrior.
Do you? Is that all right? I mean,
yeah, that's fine with me. However, I'm aware that I'm about to be a bit competitive, or whatever that word is. I don't like that statement there, to be honest. Working for a cash-strapped public body can be stressful. Sometimes as stressful as ensuring that your needs as a disabled person carer are addressed properly. I don't like that because I think if you're working for a cash-strapped public body, you always have the opportunity to leave. If you're a parent of a disabled child, you don't.
Yeah.
That's just my thinking.
I would say we have to, as hard as it is, develop compassion for them, because actually they usually, and this is my experience, and I've not had good practice from them, but they usually go in with a lot of good intentions. I'm going to help them, I'm not going to do the roads and the lighting, I'm going to help these children that have needs. And their intentions are really genuine, and they have a power structure that means they can't ask questions initially, they've got to follow it, just like all the institutions they've grown up in. And then they get a mortgage, or they get things in their life which they are like tied to as well, so they can't just leave straight away. And then they get slowly, I think of it a bit like a game of Buckaroo, they get slowly added on to. And it's almost within the culture of their training that they're taught to receive without really thinking it through, and just structures into that. And you can kind of see the ones as they go through their training. And then if they do well at that, they get promoted to a manager, and kind of create this whole cycle. And so, and it's really hard when you're on the phone to somebody and they're stopping something which is causing your child pain or trauma and difficulty in your life, to kind of understand. But the thing that helps me keep going is going, well, actually, they're more in prison often than I am, because I'm seeing the truth or having an argument. But actually, they're blind, and they're often blinded or cushioned in the local authority to think that not to think or not to be aware of it. And I try and gently drop in the awareness, and it usually sets off defence mechanisms. So you've got to drop it in really softly. But it's
I don't disagree with all
it's
of that.
a challenging
I agree with all of that, but I don't agree.
And somehow we push up against, it's not, we push up against, and we kind of get this double-weighted effect. If we fight, they fight, and guess what? They've got more money and time than us. They might have had a bit more sleep than us.
I'll take it on board.
I don't disagree. I've been the manager in social care. I have had that experience. I've also had the experience of being a mum of a disabled child. I don't think
equivalent. They're equivalent.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't doubt that their stresses are
right. We'll move on. I mean, that was a passage that was hard discussed.
Yeah, I'm sure.
One of the things is that this toolkit's been incredibly well received. I mean, it's been incredibly well received.
Yes.
And it's been incredibly well received by the statutory sector. So I do quite a lot of work with social services. I will go and talk to them. I do newsletters. I have a pile of newsletters. I have a pile of the toolkit. They'll just take it. A lot of social workers spend a lot of time arguing with senior managers and being told to get stuff basically cut it. It's quite a bullying environment. And this actually gives them some power to argue that. I think you're right. I mean, you must be right in what you've said. The point is, I think in the toolkit we need to see that we understand those difficulties so that they actually take on board this. But the other thing we say in the toolkit is that when you're writing stuff, the tone is incredibly important. And what you're saying is we've got it slightly more.
Just very, if it said nearly it's stressful,
all right.
I'd be happy.
Different kind of stresses.
It is a different kind of stress. Yeah.
I will see if we can. I will ask the person that incited that if she what she thinks. But yes, I'll take that on board. It's good. And highly contested cases, they're the ones we have almost, it's very difficult to do. These are cases that have had a history. And they're normally a cardboard box full of letters that go back over 15 years. So those are very difficult indeed. I'm not going to go into those. We tried to sort of say we'll park all of those issues because they grow like a snowball, and we can deal with one or we can unpick it, but we're doing some more research on those. Quickly finishing now then. We are knowing the law, the research is showing isn't that important. Being able to drop a few key phrases in or have a footnote to a bit of law is great. One of my colleagues is doing a PhD on this, and he found out that in his research he was showing that parents thought that law was very empowering, but when he discussed the law with them, he realised that they misunderstood it. And therefore, the law isn't empowering, it's thinking you know what the law is empowering, and saying to the other side, we can't do that. They think, well, they probably know what they're talking about, so we can't do that. So the law is a valuable strand. The thing that we're finding is, in a way, the most important thing is just support, is just being told that this is wrong and that you should complain, and then when you get knocked back with something is just giving enough support to carry on one more time, because one more time will probably solve 25–50% if you just persevere. And persevering is something that you need support from networks and groups like this. And curiously, we're seeing that is the most important thing. Knowing your rights is highly useful. The letterhead effect is a very odd one, but it is also to do with is what you're arguing is validated by somebody else. But we were talking about this earlier about, in a way, carers are not seen, they're not recognised. You know, you're a mum or something like that, but there's this idea about justice as recognition, that you're not recognised. But if you suddenly have somebody else who's and we call it the letterhead effect. I'll come back to that. So you have sort of just something from another organisation, and it doesn't really know who, effectively. It just seems to magically make people suddenly think, oh gosh, you know, this is being said by a person, not just, you know, a mum. It just seems to have this dramatic effect.
I so want to send a letter now and complain with the whole just to see if they actually take it.
It would amazing.
Just want to try it.
It would be
research.
It's great research. Just having that thought myself. Randomised.
I was going to say that I had one letter with the House of Commons in my little bundle with Ben Bradshaw's name at the bottom of it, and that was the second letter he'd written to the local authority.
Really?
The first one they'd ignored.
Really?
So the fact that he'd written twice on my behalf showed what I was up against, and I only had a minuscule legal bundle, and the local authorities bundle was 200 pages. Mine was minuscule. We won on being succinct. Although my child's statement ran to 21 pages, which was the longest statement the judge had ever seen. But that was only because I was trying to write years of not having needs met. So
it was probably what statement should look like, actually. And I think getting your rights is useful, but not overdoing it, sort of thing. I've written a book with Steve Roach and Jan Reed that's just come out last year, which is Disabled Children Law. You can download that. And the Council for Disabled Children paid for that to be free on the internet. It's about 600 pages long. And there's the social care guide that's just coming out.
That one's out.
That one's out. The Welsh one's just coming out. So it's getting this stuff is useful, I think, in terms of empowering.
Sometimes, I guess it's even the reverse psychology as well. So we're thinking in terms of questioning them with a letterhead or And I was just thinking of collectively as parents in North Devon, I was asked to put together a letter asking why direct payments were going over to the Devon card.
Oh yeah.
And all parents had to do it or else. Basically, we had these threatening letters saying do it or else. It was threatening, yes. And so I just wrote back and said, could you show me the legal documentation that explains we have to sign this? And I haven't heard anything since.
Yeah, and that's the point about getting it in writing, because I don't think that's lawful.
It's not.
But they just want it's a game of chicken almost. You know that you agree because they tell you you've got to. But well, show us the document that says that, because if they did that, we could get a lawyer to look at it and just say. So it is so important to get stuff in writing. And often when I'm doing these things, you say, oh, someone says something absolutely outrageous. They say they report that the local authority says something completely outrageous, and you say, get it in writing, because it'd be great. And then they say, I've got it in writing. You know, you think they can't really say that, but they do. They do sometimes say laws because they haven't run it past their lawyers, and they think it's fine. And then you know it's okay. And so we've got some lovely precedent letters on that. Be succinct, which has just been mentioned, and if you can, as you've said, you let things go. You know that you're going to get. This is the point. I think it's Julie was saying that it's we will fight on some issues, and we park so many. So you're probably experts on that. Anyway, you can't fight on everything. And then we've got a section on what public bodies must do. They must act reasonably, and we're going to put in something that said, as I said, proportionately. Proportionate means they mustn't be disproportionate. We've got helpful words. Just those snippets seem to carry quite a lot of weight. I say we're going to get this difficult box thing running fairly soon. It's with the web design at the moment. There's a guide on how to get lawyers. You still can get legal aid for these issues. Not for special education needs, but for other issues, social care issues, respite care. So there's still legal aid. There's one or two firms in this area that do that. Now this is, Lisa, you're going to be doing this. So this is just sort of the end of this, is to remind that we would really like feedback from these sessions, because the idea is that we'll probably spend a little time on that.